Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, are you fed up with news bulletins filled with doom and gloom? Do you need a little pick-me-up, something to give your spirits a lift? If so, you may find our next item of interest. For his daily politics soapbox, the historian Johan Norberg has been looking back at the pace of human progress and argues we've never had it so good.
Back when this building was a warehouse in the 1800s and Charles Dickens was alive, most people in Britain lived in what is now regarded as extreme poverty. But even then, life had begun to improve. A century earlier, people had to subsist on average on fewer calories than the average child gets today in sub-Saharan Africa. I know this is not the story the headlines tell, but there has never been a better time to be alive than today. Poverty, malnutrition, illiteracy, child mortality and child labour, all defining features of Dickensian London, are falling faster than at any other point in human history. Every minute that we complain about the world, another 100 people rise out of poverty. The golden age is now. And yet pessimism resonates. A YouGov poll found that just 5% of Britons think that the world, all things considered, is getting better. And populists of the left and right constantly reinforce this sense of doom and gloom. The reality is that globalization has led to an expansion of wealth on a magnitude which is difficult to comprehend. It's no coincidence that this wealth creation has occurred alongside a massive expansion of government for the people, by the people. 25 years ago, barely half of all the world's countries were democracies. Today, almost 2/3 are. Freedom is still on the march. So why does everybody remain convinced that the world is going to the dogs? Well, because human beings pay more attention to the bad news, as the thoroughbred fretters we are. And now we have more information about all those bad things than ever before. Disasters and human suffering are not new, but global media and cell phone cameras are. Nostalgia, too, is biological. As we get older, we take on more responsibility and start looking back at an imagined carefree youth. Is it a coincidence that we have this wave of nostalgia in the Western world now, as the baby boom generation is retiring? The problem is that pessimism is politically potent. Frightened people want to build walls and elect strongmen who promise to keep them safe. This would undermine the openness that our progress depends on. So the one thing we have reason to fear is fear itself.
That was Johan Norberg in St. Catherine's Dock. He now joins us live from Stockholm. Welcome to the programme, Johan Norberg. So basically you're saying that we should all stop moaning and get on with it. We've never had it so good. Is that a fair summary?
In a way, it's a fair summary. I think we have missed the kind of progress that the world is making, but we do have things to fear. And I think the one thing we have to fear is fear itself, and because panicked people react in not always rational ways.
But if everything is so good, and it's always interesting to have a corrective to the general gloom and doom, if you're right, why are people now increasingly voting against the mainstream, which has delivered what you think is rather good? We've seen that from Brexit to Mr. Trump. President Hollande is now standing down in France. There's an Italian referendum that Mr. Renzi could well lose. People don't feel the way you're saying. They're voting against the powers that be.
Right. And I think one of the reasons is that the political establishment has failed dramatically in many ways as well. The euro wasn't a big success. We had the financial crisis, the Middle East in chaos. So there are huge problems as well, and people are right to be angry about those things. But I think even more important is the way we consume information nowadays. We're a problem-seeking species, and that's what kept us alive. But it means that we pay more attention to bad news. Well, now we have global news 24 hours a day. We have social media, so that means that we can see, we have access to all the bad things as they happen in real time. So I think human suffering and problems, that's not new, but the cell phone camera is.
And you've mentioned, of course, the spread of democracy, which you linked to the general improvement in living standards. But it's also had a change in people's attitudes. There were huge inequalities in Victorian times in Europe, in Britain, for example, but the country wasn't that democratic, so not too much was done about it. Today, people feel that even if things in general are okay, there's a lot of inequality and injustice around, that those who brought the financial system to its knees in the end paid no penalty, whereas those who had done nothing to bring it to its knees suffered enormously. And there's a sense of injustice among ordinary people.
Yeah, and I can sympathize with that. And we did sort of save all the banks, and the taxpayers had to take care for all those rich people, socialism for the rich, and that was unjust. But let's not forget the big picture. Yes, there are inequalities in the world, and Bill Gates is 10 million times richer than you and I, but I don't think he's 10 million times better off than we are, because globalization and technological development means that he probably uses the same cell phone and the same computer as we do. He doesn't have much better access to information than we do. He doesn't live 30 or 40 years longer than the middle class do nowadays. And that's the great story of our time, that yes, there are huge inequalities, but what really matters in those areas, real quality of life, then we have actually seen more equality in our time.
Okay. Zoe, what do you make of this?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy with the nostalgia idea, with the idea that, you know, we're naturally nostalgic and we're looking for an idealised past, and it wasn't ideal. No. Where I differ from this view is that it is a very big picture. So actually, when you look at inequality across the globe, of course it's going to reduce, because very deeply entrenched poverty in the poorest countries of the world is improving. But that, when you look at a democratic movement, you have to look at it in a bordered way, because that's how people vote. So you can't say Americans have voted for Trump illogically because their conditions of life have improved, because the conditions of the globe have improved. Their wages have actually stagnated for 30 years. And that's what counts. Everybody's democratic identity is bordered, so the fact that people in Bangladesh are better off doesn't actually impact upon my experience of my life here.
Okay. Sam?
Britons are a pessimistic lot. If you look at the polling question, do you think your children will be better off than you are? Then for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, consistently there's been a big lead of people who think that they won't do. They see structural problems in the economy, problems with buying houses, problems with wage growth, problems with salary growth. And I think that those things do play big in people's minds. So yes, we probably all do have the same similar reference points, iPhones, computers and all the rest of it. But I'm not sure that fully captures the reasons behind some of the pessimism that British society today feels.
Do you find that people, Johan, are becoming more pessimistic, even if you don't think it's justified? Are people becoming more pessimistic?
I think they do. This is one area where things don't get better, the attitude to the world and to history. And I think one of the reasons is that all these problems that you are talking about, and that I talk about a lot of the time as well, they are real and they do exist, but you can't compare them to the kind of problems that our grandparents faced. But what happens is that we begin to take that progress for granted. We just assume that we will all be 80 years, and then instead we think about the problems for the social security systems and the pension system as that happens. So we are problem seekers, and that's one of the reasons why we solve problems as well. But then that gives us the impression that these problems are more frequent and they're more dramatic than I think that
The
they
other-
really are.
Yes, sir.
The other thing that this doesn't really address, and which I'm sure you do, I know you address in the rest of your work, is climate change. But a lot of the driver of the pessimism is driven by the fact that there is an impending disaster, which has been demonstrated many times. And even though we have the kind of technological prowess to deal with it, we don't have the political will. And that does drive a sense of kind of democratic impotence and panic, which I think informs a lot of other debates around it.
Johan?
Yes, and it's not a coincidence that we focus on big problems today like global warming, for example. But that's because we had other environmental problems that we dealt with. In Britain, the 6 leading pollutants have been reduced by 70% since 1990. The forests are growing again, and the Thames, the River Thames that was declared biologically dead in the 1950s, is now teeming with fish. So we do have problems, big problems.
I've never seen a fish
And we
in the
focus on
Thames.
them because we solved many of the other problems that poisoned our lungs and destroyed our forests.
We're going to have to go before we lose the line to Stockholm to you, but I thank you for joining us today on that subject.
Thank you.
I've been getting